Hi, my name is Todd Bonnewell. Welcome to Hacking Capitalism. I'm joined by Joe Blankenship. Joe?
Cool. Hi. You can find out more about me at thejoeblankenship.com, and it is an absolute pleasure to be here for this final working session for the initial manifestation of this book that we're working on. So,
Yep, it's exciting. It's like a miniature rough draft, right? It's
yeah.
kind of coming together all complete here on this step. Um,
Oh,
yeah, Joe, we're looking at post-capitalism. So let me switch this up here. Post-capitalism, and then we're going to combine these two chapters into this one working session here,
yep.
and we're going to cover post-capitalism in the first chapter that we're going to cover, and then advice for future generations
Mhm.
after that. So, with that, Joe, do you
Yeah,
want to kick us
absolutely.
off?
Yeah, and for the tens of viewers that we've had, one of the sessions we had before, I think it was acquiring production of means. We might go back and record that later, but as of right now, I think for this being kind of our last session for the year, I think we'll probably just end it on this one, and then January we'll come back and start doing our regular weekly sessions, just 30-minute small casts on how relevant modern day topics relate to what we talked about in the previous working sessions. So,
Yeah.
without further ado, go into post capitalism. So, just so everybody's listening that understands, post capitalism is this idea of moving from the modern era of industrial capitalism into this neoliberal form and then looking at what happens after. So, in a lot of cases, post capitalism has kind of contextualized the neoliberal form of capitalism that has been around since the 80s and has really manifested well into the 21st century. I mean, in the US, we're dealing with just the newest cycle of that with our elections and the shakeup in terms of political relationship to economy and economic relationship and political relationships to the social dynamics that are directly affected by them. So this is where most authors begin their discussion is with this idea of post-capitalism. And we don't want to discredit any points that have been made. Everybody from Noam Chomsky to Slavoj Žižek to David Harvey to, you know, I can't remember. There's a Greek writer he does a lot of great stuff on neoliberal stuff. But there's been tons of people. Thomas Piketty, another one. But I mean, they've all made great points and have pointed out the tropes of these systems. The faults, the bad things that affect people and affect the system, affect politics and social and economics. But we need more. And when I say we need more, it has to have a value to think about what might be determined and how to get there. We need to engage with discussions about what value actually is and how that relates to values in society and politics and economics. Each one of those realms has their own ethics, has its own value sets, but the individual is kind of trapped in between all of those. So you need to ask on your personal level when you're talking about hacking capitalism, what is value to me? What is value to my family, to my friends, my community? And how does that fit into the larger value structures inside those realms? Because each person's going to have their own pathway. It's going to be different for everybody, and you're going to have to take the responsibility and accept the challenge and say, I'm going to take this thing apart. I'm going to, you know, ask what the design is. We need to engage with those older systems. And I think Todd and I have, these first few chapters, have really broken apart what hacking is, what capitalism is, what government is, what we think new systems are going to have to consider when building out the, not just in a local economy or state economy or national economy. We're talking about weaving these all together internationally into this global mesh, and really a mesh that supports the power of the individual over the power of corporations. And everything from the first hack to understanding how things move in terms of processes. We need to break those things apart. It's not magic. It's not something that is impenetrable to the individual. Even if you have a basic level of education, in places of the world that have very limited access to knowledge in general, you can still ask, what works, what doesn't work for you and your people. And when you do that, you start building on what works best out of all those selections. And that often comes into direct conflict with the rhetoric that is going on nowadays. everybody has an opinion about how economics works and how it's affecting people both politically and socially. But it really boils down to, when we get past these discussions on, gender and race and inequality and these things, like Black Lives Matter movement and stuff like that, when we start breaking apart those discussions, we start seeing that there's a strong economic tie to that. And it ultimately comes back to the economics of capitalism. It boils down to those who have and those who do not, the haves and the have-nots. That paradigm from the industrial age going to the post-capitalist era, that dynamic hasn't gone away. It seems minimal in the United States because we have so much. But in other parts of the world, you see a drastic, stark contrast between poverty and people that have wealth. And in the U.S. we don't think about it, but that's because we're the dominant, hegemons of this system. We're the rulers in this case of this system that we kind of took on and really pushed all around the world. When we talk about Chile in 1973, we're talking about Argentina, we're talking about Iran, all these things that happened throughout history. It was because, we have economic interests in these areas, and we're going to leverage the political power and the social, apathy to really put things in motion that are processes of, destruction as much as they are creation. You can't have one without the other. So, and I think what Todd and I are trying to say is that, I won't speak for Todd, obviously you have points on all of these, is that we're saying ask questions, because when you see something in the news, especially in the news, in social media, Facebook, Twitter, just your initial reaction should be, that's bullshit. Because it's always going to be A, subjective, B, it's going to have biases, and C, it's going to be a partial truth. My dad always said, don't believe anything you hear and only half of what you see. Because there's everybody's truth is always shifting. As time goes on, your truth is always changing, and whenever it leaves you outward, that's always exacerbated. It's no one person's truth is another person's truth. It's just a shade of the reality that affects them, maybe directly or indirectly, but it's always going to be shifting. So unless you're asking questions, the questions are meant to lead you towards a truth, and a truth that's always fleeting. And unless you're engaged with that process, then you're always going to be stuck in these static past historical states that aren't going to be very beneficial to you or your families or your friends or communities in the future. So, and I think this brings us to our questions. What should the world look like to you? And this is what everybody has to ask. It's the first and probably most important question. And how does that scale and merge with other people's? Because once you leave your very subjective, personal, selfish idea of what the world should be, you're going to have to deal with addressing these conflicts with other people. And I think if we're talking about post-capitalism, and we're talking about an alternative to capitalism, as we hack that system apart, put it back together, take it apart, put it back together to find something that works better. Take all the best cases. Maybe that is capitalism in just a different form. Maybe we found a way for the individual to truly harness in a decentralized, more democratic, more egalitarian way that has mechanisms built in to encourage trustless engagements and egalitarianism. Maybe it's not socialism, maybe it's not anarchism, which are some of the most predominant views of what post-capitalism should be. Maybe
we don't have to put a label on it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. I think so often, people get so stuck on the idea of what things are, and not what they are, right? Not what we agree they are, but what they are in their own reality. If you hear communism, socialism, capitalism, those mean something to different people depending on where they came from, what their station is in life. But I think the important point that I'd like to make there is it's that label. It's getting stuck with, well, we can't have socialism. No, we can't have communism. So we have to have capitalism. But it's not perfect, so it has to change. So what does it become? Does it, like Joe was saying, does it stay capitalism? Do we call it something different? Does it take a different shape? Or are we really talking about communism or socialism? And those just need to shed their negative, implications or the ideas in the mind that people are holding on to. So I think that, that labeling thing, whether it's people or it doesn't really matter what it is, as soon as we start to label things, and I know we do it for communication purposes, but we too often we're not agreeing on what the word means before we move forward. So I just wanted to kind of throw that in there, Joe, that we just, that dead on, man. Labels are, it becomes destructive.
Well, but then again, that's why we ask the questions about them, because unless you're looking beyond that symbol, because like I said, our generation, in large part, we're not the ones who made communism or anarchism a bad thing, or capitalism. We're just the ones dealing with it right now. And the future generations, our kids, our nieces, our nephews, in some cases grandchildren, they're the ones who are going to have to deal with what we're doing now. And unless we're taking action now and we're asking those questions, they're just going to be dealing with a much more complicated, much more, it almost seems like magic to a lot of people. It's like we went from systems of bartering where someone had a resource and another person had a resource or service, and they wanted to exchange those, and they had to negotiate between each other what the exchange value would be for A and B, or A, B, and C. And nowadays we have complex economic structures. We have algorithmic trading. We have all these things that are running a global economy, and it seems so insurmountable to the regular person. They look at all that economic behemoth that is Wall Street, that's London, that's Tokyo, that's Beijing and Shanghai and Hong Kong, and they look at all these multi-trillion-dollar points in these economic systems, and it's to the individual like, well, I can't fight that. But that's where you're absolutely wrong, is that if people get together and they understand how those systems function, and the most immediate thing you can do is just understand how it affects you locally. Like if you're in a town in BFE nowhere, in rural, wherever, you can at least see that, hey, my local economy, it has this problem. Why does it have this problem? Oh, it's because I don't have access to a resource, or I don't have access to a mean of production, like a machinery or transport or good roads. Then you can scale out and be like, okay, well, why don't I have good roads? Yeah. It's because the nation that I'm working in, or the state I'm working in, doesn't allocate money via the political structure. Okay, well, what's wrong with the political? And you see that it landslides until you're like, oh crap. Okay, well, I have this list of 11 things that are the most pressing issues for me locally, and I need to ask why these things exist. And if I can I engage through either social avenues inside communities or towns or local areas, or the political apparatus of the state or the local government or the national government, or can I actually harness true economic power via the individuals and recontextualize what value is to get something different? Maybe it's not a fiat currency or a credit, or something from an NGO or something like that, or something from the IMF or the World Bank. Maybe my nation doesn't have to go into debt to essentially be enslaved for, while other nations extract raw natural resources from me. Yeah. Maybe there's a different source of value that I can provide that will mean that I get to provide a service or a good to somebody and get an equal value of exchange in the global economy. And like I said, I think these are questions that we really need to ask, and we need to say, yeah, great stuff has been done with post-capitalism and the research and kind of contextualizing what's going on, but we need to start asking more questions now, and better questions that actually pertain to tomorrow. Because unless we're not, we're just going to be re-engineering the present for the past and not planning for the future. And I think that's one of the biggest things we have problems with now. So
yeah, I think that if
that brings us right into our next section, actually.
Yeah, it does. One quick point that I want to wrap up with here is that when we exactly like you're saying, I mean, what we need to talk about is what we value, right? And we've talked about it in past episodes, wants and needs, right? So what do we want and need? We want things that are valuable to us, right? So what do we want and need? And then I see this post-capitalism in these, it's almost like science fiction, how we take ideas about that people have written about the future, and we try to make those things a reality, right? They bring forth discussions, or they bring, they pop ideas into people's minds that they can, even as children. And then when they become adults, they go into engineering or whatever because they want to create these things that they've always dreamed about. Same thing with post-capitalism. It's like there's all this work out there. It's interesting to look at it and figure out what is of value and what things are in post-capitalism that we like or don't like, and then back into the solution and figure out, okay, these are all the things we want, like Joe was saying, and these are, then we can start taking some approaches in how to get there. But post-capitalism from our perspective is, it's something that is that we don't focus on, but that we're trying to create, right? Our solutions are trying to get us into that post-capitalism. So we're not approaching this chapter from the perspective of what we think is possible so much as what we want you to achieve what is possible. And that post-capitalism is, I think it's a great equalizer.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, the majority of the research that's been done on post-capitalism has been about identifying what works and what doesn't work inside the system. And I think if you're talking about hacking capitalism for the person, so they can, mostly it's data as a resource. I think we've hammered that one along and saying, like, in a digital age, everybody around the world should have access to some way to commodify their data as a resource. And I think, when we're talking about, especially with my research on blockchain technologies, you're talking about the idea of tokenization. How can each person establish their own currency, both in terms of exchange and use value? And I think that, like I said, this brings us right into our next thing, advice for future generations. We're not sure what this is going to look like. We're not sure how a person's going to tokenize their data or tokenize their services, or, how the use and exchange value comes together in terms of, the money or the, currencies that they're going to use either socially, politically, or economically to get stuff done. And I think we'll have to probably discuss the whole leaderless future thing, because in my mind, we're trying to get people to realize that everybody is a leader. So when you have everybody as a leader, both in terms of social, political, economic, ethics, and philosophies like that, when we have everybody on the same page, despite their differences, we understand there's going to be cultural and social and historical differences between people. We've been dealing with that forever because we're humans and that's just what we do. But if everybody really harnesses that civic responsibility that they have within these systems, then we'll understand better how to listen, not just listening to future generations in terms of what we can do now to help them later, but also to challenge these ideas of knowledge limitations to people. How do we educate people, and how do we get people to educate themselves? What accesses need to be open for them to do that? Because that's the thing is, the biggest thing, advice from my point of view, is take responsibility. It doesn't have to be a big responsibility. Like, I understand people, not everybody's the same. Everybody's going to have their different levels of capability, but everybody, regardless of the capability levels, can take a certain level of responsibility within these systems, economic, political, social, whatever. They can accept the challenge, they can find a challenge especially themselves, they can find a knowledge level that they're comfortable operating with, and one that mutualistically builds into a bigger system. Because no person's an island anymore. We're all digitally connected and woven together, and if we're not looking towards that reality, this increasingly cyborg enabled self, we're all becoming part of that collective, and we don't realize it. Even though we hype individuality more so than ever, but we've never been more connected to each other. And unfortunately, it's been kind of a dumbing down effect, because we distribute knowledge so quickly and so fastly, people don't have a time to really critically engage with it. They don't have a time to build their own opinion. They're just like, okay, well, these three news sources said this thing, not realizing that two of them copied one of them. And there's only really one source that maybe be questionable, credibility. And it doesn't help you as an individual say, oh, well, this is reality. No, that's someone built a reality for you. You're just living in it.
Yeah, and they don't understand what has been built. They haven't had the education to get them to the point where they understand the basis, right? and I think that can be a problem. And back to the leaderless future, I think too that through artificial intelligence and automation, I think those are going to be huge in getting us to that leaderless future, right? Because you don't, it's like having a driver, right, as your leader. If you don't need a driver anymore, just because you just don't need a driver, to me, that's what that leaderless future kind of means to me, is that you just displace, you start displacing people, you start displacing cabinet members and presidents and vice presidents, and you just, because as long as they're not needed anymore, if the work is getting done, then we don't need it. And and I don't think that obviously our goal is not to set forth to achieve a leaderless future. I think that just through inspection and some foresight here, we're just saying what we think, and I think that's it's just, we need to get the hands out of the power of people, because we know people are have problems. So, and
yeah, and I mean, if you look at the Bolshevik Revolution, or you talk about Reaganomics, or you talk about any of these systems, or command economies in the USSR, it's like historically we have a problem with just submitting. And it's weird because humans, when the standard of living gets really, really good, we become so lackadaisical. We're like, whatever, we don't care. We don't care about engaging with these political and economic problems. And it leaves the door wide open to people that are willing to really exploit the crap out of our weaknesses, our greed, our apathy, or whatever. We're willing to submit to terrible leadership in lieu of not thinking about the future, because we're so caught up with these fears of death and what happens if this happens. I'm going to suffer. It's going to be pain. Whether it's an individual consideration or a social consideration, these become very immediate concerns, and we completely forget about listening to future generations. And by listening, we're not saying just listen to your kids. No, because your kids are unwitting victims to our apathy in the past. So what we need to do is we need to engage now for them tomorrow. And unless you're doing that, you're not building any kind of future. If you mention future, you're a liar. I'm sorry. Unless you're saying, I'm working for that 12-year-old kid who doesn't know any better. I've failed to provide them a good public education system. I've failed to provide them good resources for them to gain adequate knowledge, for them to build upon a solid foundation. You're not doing your job. Yeah. You're not responsible for society. You're not taking charge of any kind of system other than your own individual needs. And on your point on AI, when we're talking about substituting human labor for these automated processes, unless you're a human that understands what that transition means, you're going to be victimized by it, because there are hundreds of thousands of middleman jobs out there that are slowly but surely being replaced today by artificial intelligence, not general AI. I'm talking about narrow artificial intelligence, just really smart protocols that do menial labor tasks that can be cumulatively connected to each other. So, I mean, even my current work, I'm working on building my own decentralized autonomous organization. That's a whole bunch of smart contracts, computer programs that work with each other inside of this protocol that do all the work of a regular company. That's a huge implication to, even 10 years ago in corporate America. Mm-hmm. I mean, what are these, $40,000, $50,000 a year jobs going to be tomorrow? Well, they're not going to exist.
Yeah.
Even computer scientists are now finding it a challenge, because we have found a way to build script generators that have minimal requirements for actual computer scientists with 4 years degrees coming out of a university. I mean, what are those kids going to do? I mean, unless they're working on the leading edge of stuff, which a huge group of people are already doing, they're going to have a job. So even they, 10 years ago, computer science, you can come out of a 4-year degree program from a public or private university and get paid decently. Nowadays, you can't do that. I mean, JavaScript programmers are a dime a dozen nowadays. What are those kids going to do? So unless those kids are willing to engage persistently with this can't stop, won't stop attitude, and getting us the past generation to step up for them, it's hard for them to say, why should we care? Well, we're the ones that should be working for you. You're supposed to be demanding of us what you need to do now for your future. And unless, but we haven't provided them the education to do so. So they don't understand that, first off, what is the difference between necessity and desire? And secondly, what the process of change is. Because things are always changing. They're always moving forward extremely quickly. And as you pointed out, with automation, these things are moving forward at speeds that are non-human. I mean, they're way beyond the consideration or, the conceptualization of human beings. The speeds at which data travels, the speed at which things are moving in terms of economics and politics and social circles. It's, with the internet and the Internet of Things, we're really hybridizing our spaces, making them increasingly digital, which means that the control of those spaces are only going to be managed by people that understand what processes are going on inside those spaces. So if people that were supposed to be, the past generations, the old people like Todd and I, who are really trying to work towards helping future generations, kids who are 18 years or younger, if Todd and I are trying to build them a future, along with everybody else that's listening to this and everybody that's on board with this idea, we had our chance. We had our chance to demand of past generations what happened, what went wrong, and how to fix it. And not everybody's needed in that process. We need people that have the control of the switches to flip the right ones so that we can start building something better for the future. And people that, especially people in politics that have this like Cold War mindset of us versus them, this very separatist, very isolationist type idea, and especially what we're dealing with nowadays in the U.S. In the United States, we have this, this political regime that is slowly but surely becoming this Monroe Doctrine-esque, in very neoliberal economic, conceptualization of what is right and what is wrong. The black and white thing doesn't work anymore. It's all gray, and unless we start educating people towards that spectrum of gray, they're just going to be victimized by that, political ramification, the economic implications of that, and ultimately the social degradation and deconstruction of their future, their dreams, everything that involved with helping them build a better world. We're slowly but surely allowing other people to disempower them. So yes, old people need to sit down, but at the same time, when the younger generation needs us to stand up, we need to do so 110%.
Yeah, as long as we're behind them and on what they're. To me, it's so often it's like we look at kids and it's like they're naive, and when you ask them a question like, should we be invading this country, and killing people? I mean, what kid that hasn't been influenced is going to say yes, we should kill women and children, in other countries so that we can keep on keeping on? No, they need to be told lies, right? They need to be told, well, no, they're bad people, or there's bad people we're going after and they're just collateral damage, right? Like, you have to justify it to these children because they're smart, they know better, they haven't been desensitized to, murder, right? I mean, so in that way, I think a lot of times if we talk to them, their goals are cleaning up the environment, world peace, those are the things we should be striving to move towards, not justifying what we're doing to the younger generation so that they continue to do it, right? And I think that's so often what we do instead of following them and truly following them, and obviously we're not talking about, a kid going, I want to drive, a 4-year-old, I want to drive, and going, okay, you're the leader, go ahead, like, come on, let's be adults about it, but let's talk to the kids and truly listen, and what is it what they want? If what they want is peace and, equality and these things, then, and you're not trying to get those things for you, if they're your children and you're not trying to achieve those things for your children, then you're just part of the problem. You're just moving things forward in a way that they don't want. And all you're doing is you're changing their view on the world so that it fits with the world instead of changing the world so it fits with their view. And
Yeah.
so to me, when old people need to sit down, of course, we need to help them, right? Absolutely. We don't need to sit. We just don't need to stand up and give our opinion all the time. We don't need to run things all the time, and especially people that are way older than us, Joe. There's just no need for those people to have a say. It's just unnecessary.
Yeah, and that's the thing though, is that we automatically assume that without fair, for a fair and equitable consideration, that kids have no say. But then again, it's one of those things where we've kind of taken away their facility to say anything. It's like they're the most at-risk group of people in the world, and yet we do the least amount to help them gain a footing until they hit 18. And what good is 18 years of non-development to a human being? And I think that brings us back to the last section, which is what is value and what are values. It's one of those things where it's one, we look at kids with this idea of death and dying and killing things. We're persistently abstracting and dehumanizing people. We're abstracting them to the point where we can quantify everything about them. And I think one of the most pressing things for future generations to ask, what is it to be human, and what is the value of a human life?
Yeah.
And inside of this new system, whatever this new, after we hack capitalism, and whatever new systems evolve out of that hack, every generation from past to present and into the future is going to have to ask, what is it to be human inside these systems? Because the current economic systems we have are dependent upon stealing humanity from humans. You're either a laborer, or you're a producer, or you're a producer of a mean that is a producer, but you're not just a qualitative human that has an intrinsic value. And unless you can accept that very nebulous and very important aspect of what it is to be an individual inside of a community, inside of a larger global structure of social interaction, you're just going to further make this thing worse. Because the political entity, unless the social entity is willing to recapture that political overarching umbrella of consideration for what is a human, what is the value of human life, then the economics is going to say, listen, we can just abstract this human question into ones and zeros, and we'll make it marginal. As long as we have 2 standard deviations worth of people that are compliant within these systems, we don't give a shit about the other ones. And we need to say, no, that outlier matters.
Yeah.
And the most important questions we have about where all these systems are going are in that outlier group. Because the main group of people, that 95% of people, yeah, they're exactly what you said earlier. We're just training them based on past experiences where they fit into this past paradigm, which is ultimately detrimental to everybody. If you're just training sheep to walk through, to stay inside their own little field and eat grass their entire life, ultimately just be harvested and done away with, that's one way to do an economic system, but it's not a way to positively grow into the future.
Yeah.
We need everybody to be a leader in that, so that we can move towards that leaderless state where everybody's a decision maker, but no one has to take direct leadership.
Yeah.
But once again, it's one of those things where opening those flows of knowledge to everybody, that's only one of many steps. But the educational system has to be harnessed by human beings for other human beings, and not just for laborer A talking to laborer B to produce service or good C and D. It's like, it's the most hermetic and sanitary view of what a human system and process is. And I think it ultimately dehumanizes the future generations and completely disconnects them from these questions and makes them powerless to engage with anything that they have to engage with in order to gain some kind of progress. And us sitting down, that's the most important first step we need to take, is realize that, hey, we need to be prepping them to lead for us. And I can't be a 45-year-old person to understand what an 18-year-old has to deal with. No, I should have been empowering them from the get-go to say, hey, our generation needs this. And my generation can go, got it, we're already dying anyhow, so we're going to work our butts off until we get you there, so you can do that for the next generation.
Yep.
Man, that's
It's as easy as that, Joe.
it's not. That's the thing is like, I mean, there's just so many things, but I think
Yeah.
if people just start asking questions, start and contextualize it within that, what is value? What is the value of human life? I think
I
that's
think it
probably the
helps
most thing
people.
we can do.
Yeah, it helps people see through the crap that doesn't matter, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's like you said it so many times, teaching people to think for themselves, right? Educating them. It's we don't. It's not that somebody should have to do it for you, but at the same time, if you need that help, it's there.
Yeah.
So take your free will, go forth, and then when you need to lean, society's there for you. I mean, it doesn't sound too bad to me, but I don't know. I'm
I don't
old
know.
now.
Well, I said if there's any philosophers and economists that want to merge those realms, because there is this, there is a strong academic research, of economic philosophy and ethics and stuff like that. So, if there's anybody listening that wants to contribute on an aspect, please do,
Yeah.
because I think there's a lot of stuff that we just breezed over here that's going to be added as we write this thing up. And anybody that has expertise in those areas or even has questions in those areas, probably more importantly the questions, please, add comments to the book, contribute, contact us directly if you have any questions. We're more than happy to, help you out. If you need language support and translating your ideas from,
English to English.
even English to English. Yeah. So you just contact us and we'll figure out how to use Google Translate to get your ideas into the book.
Yeah.
Because I think, that global inclusiveness is very important, to get everybody from any scale to say, hey, I have a voice. Then yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Please let us know because we'll do everything we can to help you contribute and get involved with this project.
Definitely. Awesome, Joe. I think that just about does it for episode 13.
Yeah, and this first edition of the book, pretty much. I mean,
Yeah.
after this, you and I are going to just be writing up the parts and adding in references and hoping that it takes motion. Hopefully we get to speak on this in 2017 and
Yeah.
engage with the tens of listeners that we have and maybe the future listeners that we're going to have.
That's right.
So yeah, I have a lot of hope for the future. So hopefully we can get some stuff moving that's positive for those future generations.
I'm with you, Joe. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. This is Todd and Joe signing off from Hacking Capitalism. We'll see you in a new series where we're going to discuss some current current news or whatever. We'll figure it out as we go. But thanks again. Thanks for watching. Thanks, Joe, for joining me and making this thing real.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you everybody so much. It's been so much fun and I can't wait to keep on going with it.
All right. Thanks, guys. See you.